facilitate today. And as you'll soon learn, this is an issue that is very close to my heart, and at a time like this, an issue of absolute urgency. So just want to acknowledge the work that all of you are doing at a distance at this point of time, but also just recognising the incredibly vital role you play for the young people that you teach. And that's one thing I really want to focus on in my short introduction, and then one thing I'll sort of segue into in introducing our wonderful teachers today is just highlighting the importance of the work that each of us do, but also highlighting that for us to do great work, we also need to be looking after our own mental health and well-being. So as I go through my quick introduction, and giving you a little bit of story, a little bit of a journey in terms of how I arrived at where I'm at today, just keeping in mind that idea of our own mental health and well-being, and finding ways to enhance or amplify our professional efficacy at such difficult times. So as Ali introduced, I do wear a number of hats at the moment, and it's my hope that through this presentation you'll see how those hats sort of intersect, come together to create a way of working for me that really is teacher-centered and teacher-focused. Next slide, please. So I am a teacher, and I will always call myself a teacher even though I'm not in a classroom anymore. And my life as a teacher really became most important, most critical when I experienced a major crisis myself, and that the city that I was working in New Zealand experienced a major earthquake, which decimated most of the downtown area and really badly impacted the school where I was teaching also. So I was teaching in a secondary school, high school, and mainly in a low-income and multi-ethnic area. So a number of the different social and economic factors that were present in that area really compounded the crisis, the stress that a lot of our young people were in. And so a lot of my work at the time was focused in on adolescent development and community development through the classroom. And so when the earthquake hit, it was an opportune time for me to really focus in on the young people, their experience of this crisis, their lack of access to different resources or different avenues to have their experiences and their struggles recognised by different community leaders and humanitarian agencies. And so I found my work as a teacher was not just continuing the curriculum and upholding the syllabus, but also finding really unique opportunities to extend the leadership of young people, and particularly young people who traditionally had not been academically strong or had leadership opportunities in the school. Some of them were actually the best place to be powerful voices for change in the community. And so I ended up, as a teacher, did a lot of writing at this time in national media, and did a lot of presentations internationally around young people's experience through a crisis. But more so, I really wanted to highlight this tension around teachers as frontline workers, or teachers as like any other professional, being able to take this time to sort of rest and recover. And of course now in COVID-19, again, that tension is at the forefront. As teachers, are we frontline professionals or are we different? And so my experience in the earthquake was really some teachers joining forces with firefighters, social workers, paramedics and police to be at that front line to lead some of the response and recovery processes in the community. Whereas a number of other teachers, fairly and for their own reasons, really saw themselves as, I'm just a math teacher, I'm just a science teacher, I just teach physical education, therefore taking a lead in this response is not my role. And so it's actually that tension that's inspired and driven a lot of my work since. And next slide, please, Teresa. And some of the research I've done in Indonesia, in Bangladesh and elsewhere has really focused in on teachers' work in crisis contexts, but most importantly, trying to leverage the incredible skill and knowledge that teachers have working closely with communities to inform really practical and child-centered responses to crisis, whether it's earthquakes like I experienced, or conflict and displacement as is prevalent in other parts of the world. And now with my work with the UN, really looking at COVID-19, school lockdowns, and this whole challenge of school reopenings. And so I don't know if any of you have come across the work of Rebecca Solnit, but she's got a wonderful book called A Paradise Built in Hell. And she's also got another piece of work called Hope in the Dark. But Rebecca Solnit's got a really great sort of phrase in there, which is helping us to move away from this idea of post-traumatic stress to actually an idea of post-traumatic growth. So how do we use these experiences in crisis and our own struggles as educators working in really complex situations to try and grow and try and utilize these opportunities to make a difference. And so even though I still call myself a teacher, I've had the privilege of being able to write a number of documents for international agencies that really build on this idea of teachers as leaders and teachers as change makers in crisis contexts. So, the links are here for you to explore afterwards, but one piece of work I've worked on is with the World Bank, looking at education sector recovery. And one thing I did in there is, as much as we're looking at policy making and funding to support schools and education systems to be more resilient and, previous slide, to be more resilient and to build back better, it's also looking at the place of teachers in that work. And also last year with the Interagency Network for Education Emergencies, we really again wanted to highlight in multiple different countries the amazing work that teachers do to support children and young people in crisis. But one thing we amplified in this is the vital importance of protecting teachers' mental health and wellbeing and investing in that just as much as we invest in children's recovery. Next slide. And if Ellie, you can give me a heads up on time if I'm starting to go over. But just given that this whole webinar series is focused in on the experience of teachers globally, I just want to give you a little bit of background in terms of the challenges that South Asia is facing at the moment. And this is where a lot of my work's focused. So that's countries like Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and India. And in this region, we have 460 million children out of school and close to 60 million teachers without work in the traditional sense at present. And a large number of those teachers not being paid or not being able to access support, whether it be professional development or leadership support. In terms of distance learning in South Asia at the moment, only 20% of the population have internet access, but 84% have mobile access. And whilst that is a positive statistic, we have a challenge where only so many girls and young women can actually access those digital devices. So there's a real gender divide in terms of who can access and progress with distance learning. And in many of these contexts as well, because of these struggles with technology and other domestic burdens, especially for female teachers, roughly only about 20% of teachers have been able to contact students and continue some form of learning continuity with students as well. And one thing we're looking at in the South Asia region, and this is just to provide some comparative perspective for you, is we're actually projecting that the longer the schools are closed, the larger the numbers of students who won't return to school will be. And so there's some projections for countries like Nepal or Bangladesh, which actually have really positive gender parity in terms of girls' access to school, where if schools remain closed after September, we'll start to look at 8% of students not coming back. And if we keep schools closed through until early next year, we could be looking at a number as high as 30% of vulnerable and marginalised children not coming back to school. And so in South Asia, similarly to the USA, our biggest challenge particularly is for vulnerable, marginalised children and getting them back to school safely, but also understanding that the longer schools are closed, it's less likely that we will be able to re-engage those learners with schooling. Now, in the interest of time, I'll go quite quickly over the next slides. So next slide, Teresa. At the start of COVID-19, I wanted to really reflect on my experience working in different contexts internationally, but also my experience as a teacher working in a crisis. And so I wrote some blogs for the Interagency Network for Education Emergencies, really looking at this idea of teachers' mindsets and how we approach this enormous challenge in a way that keeps ourselves protected and motivated, but also delivers the best possible learning experiences for children. And so I won't go into depth here, but these are just references for you to refer to later. And then we'll sort of move into our teacher presentations. But in terms of teacher mindsets, when I wrote these, I did not imagine that our schools would be closed for so long. And of course, reflecting back now, I wrote these in March, a number of the struggles that we're confronting as teachers are far greater than many of us anticipated. Having said this, I do encourage you to have a read of these blogs, because they are written in a way that, again, looks at our role as teachers and as educators as frontline professionals, but also as central in reimagining what education can be, and looking at the different crises, the different struggles we had prior to COVID-19, and looking at this COVID-19 as an opportunity to challenge policymakers, to challenge our governments, to invest and implement the changes that we aspire to see as educators. However, to do this, I'm also arguing that our mindsets and our own conceptualization of our leadership as educators needs to be really strong. And it's hard to be strong. It's hard to be to have that kind of conviction when we're going through the types of struggles that we are in our own families, in our own communities, and just simply by being isolated from the children and young people we love to work with so much. So I hope that if you get a chance to engage with this writing, to take it in context, understand that it was written a number of months ago, but also to take the silver linings out of it, and looking at how do we, one, look after our own mental health and well-being, but how do we also look at this opportunity to challenge some of the inequities and inadequacies that existed in our system prior to COVID-19 too. Next slide, Teresa. And again, as I'm sure our wonderful teacher presenters will introduce today, this is an enormous challenge that we have in front of us. And one thing I really learned as a teacher in a crisis and in my work since is just the power of focusing on what you can influence, because there is so much that we can't influence. And so when I was a teacher, I found one thing I could really influence was young people's understanding of what this crisis meant to them, and in this case it was the earthquake, but also to provide them with communication skills, organizational skills, and skills around their own mental health, well-being, and resilience, so that once we returned to school and once we started recovering from our crisis, these young people who might not have seen themselves as particularly influential leaders or having great academic prospects beforehand could actually use this crisis to kind of reconfigure their view of themselves and what their leadership or what their identity meant in their communities. And so just before I pass over, I just want to highlight one particular instance where we had a young person who before the earthquakes was regularly truant, did not see himself as really belonging in the school or having great prospects for the future. But through the earthquake, he sort of saw a way to turn his art and his creativity into a way of messaging young people's experience and young people's priorities in the earthquake. And so long story short, he went from being this truant, disengaged young person to having access to different youth and adolescent development forums through the UN and through other NGOs. And in the year following the major earthquake, he had traveled to Kenya, to Indonesia, to Japan, to Fiji, and he became a real voice of possibility and positivity through his art around actually crisis can be a really positive experience for young people if they've got the support to turn their skills and turn their passions into something really productive and something that helps other young people too. And so on finishing, and as we look at this challenge of reopening schools, I do want to leave you with that message around how do we use this moment to sort of draw out the best of some of our young people and to really connect them with their experiences, whether they're traumatic or positive. But as much as we're going to focus on curriculum and accelerating learning, how do we focus on sort of planning this future state or planning this way of young people working to help us improve our education systems moving into the future too. Next slide, if there is another one. And just finally, before I pass on to Felicity, there's a toolkit that we've developed through the Teachers in Crisis Context Collaborative. We've developed it with UNESCO. And I know most of the people on this call are teachers, but we really want to highlight the vital importance of school leaders too. And so this toolkit from UNESCO is a great way of helping school leaders to help teachers. So the Teacher Task Force for Teachers is behind this, and so their priority is making sure teachers are cared for and teachers have the best conditions possible to re-enter the classroom. But this would be a great toolkit to share with your school leaders if you feel it's worthwhile, because it really does put teachers at the centre and shows the great and important role of school leaders in supporting you and helping to build back better too. So that's the end of my introduction, and it's now my pleasure to pass over to Felicity Powell. And so I think we've got a segue slide there. So Felicity is a teacher in New Zealand, where I'm also based due to COVID-19 at the moment. And we were very fortunate and we were able to reopen schools early. And Felicity is going to share with you some of the experience of reopening and going back into a classroom in a setting that is quite similar to the setting that I worked in when I was a teacher. So Felicity, if you're on the call, the floor is yours.
Hi. Yes, hello everyone. Tēnā koutou. I am presenting in the middle of a school day at the moment, so please bear with me with any interruptions. I actually have an interruption right now with a student trying to get into the classroom, so my apologies about this. So yes, it's really wonderful to be here. And first, I'd really like to honour Ellie and Chris for coordinating this event and involving me. Really, thank you so much for giving me and others the space to speak to the unique experiences of a collective education community experiencing a global crisis phenomenon from different perspectives. Next slide, please. So my name is Felicity Powell. My students know me as Miss P. I am a computer science teacher in New Zealand here, currently in my second year of teaching. And I became a teacher through the Teach First NZ program, which is part of the Teach for All fellowship, which is modeled actually on Teach for America. Next slide, please. Prior to teaching, so I was living and working in post-earthquake Christchurch when I finished my degree, where I actually specialized in disaster risk resilience and recovery. And I spent a lot of time there working with local community organizations and learning from specialists in post-disaster response, which I feel is actually really a fortunate experience to have, particularly in the advent of this global disaster that we're experiencing right now. And that's how I connected with Chris, which was really fortunate for me. Next slide. Oh, sorry, don't change the slide, sorry. I had a slide in there. So I teach at an urban low socioeconomic decile high school. So we've got varying degrees of need and poverty and wealth here at my school. Our school campus it caters to kindergarten through to year 13. Because of the Teach First program, I only teach from grades 8 to 12. We have about 3,000 students on campus, which is quite a lot to manage. And our school is actually one of the most diverse in the country, with over 90 ethnicities represented on our roll. Next slide. So in New Zealand, it's estimated that pre-lockdown around 25% of students were without internet at home and 20% were without devices. And our school is a microcosm of these statistics. And we have students from all backgrounds, both wealth and extreme poverty. And I feel that it's really worth talking about lockdown to start with before we get to what it's like to come back. I know that a lot of you are still in lockdown. And I think it's a really good opportunity, both for me and to open up the forum to take stock of where you're at and how your lockdown mode might translate to going back, because I definitely noticed different things that I did and other teachers did that changed our experience when we got back into the classroom. Next slide. So I had actually started preparing for lockdown weeks before. I was very lucky. I'm a Google innovator, which means that I have access to a network of teachers around the world who are working in contexts like China and the US. And so we were hearing about lockdowns overseas for weeks before COVID even reached our shores. And at that point, I started surveying students and trying to prepare for, what would a lockdown look like? What would teaching from a distance look like? But we actually only got 48 hours notice from our government. So we pretty much, on the Friday, we thought we were coming back into school the next week. And then on the Sunday, we got notice from the government that we were going into level 4 lockdown. And we only had 2 teacher-only days, which was quite jarring. We didn't get to say goodbye to our students. We didn't get to kind of prepare them. I was really lucky that I had kind of prepared my classes for the idea of lockdown. And so I already knew that they knew how to contact me. There were a few things that I did that meant that we could just go easily into that transition. But I'm actually really proud of our senior leadership and how they managed that. How they managed the teacher-only days, how they kind of led with a well-being first system where we were kind of given a lot of freedom to decide how we would teach. I think one of the deciding factors for different levels of staff well-being during and post-lockdown was actually this perception of temporality. For some staff and public I spoke to across schools, there was this kind of denial aspect of lockdown not being necessary, or COVID not being a serious thing, and kind of believing that we'd be back as soon as the original 4 weeks that the government gave us would be up. And kind of knowing what I know about disaster risk and resilience, even 4 weeks of limbo it can be quite damaging. So I kind of settled into the attitude that we were in this for the long haul, and I adjusted all of my teaching plans to match. And I actually think that really helped with the transition back into my classes, and even my own well-being coming back into the classroom, just like in very incremental ways, and also being prepared for the idea that we may have to go back into another lockdown. If you could skip 2 slides, please. So next slide. Beautiful. So we came out of lockdown about seven weeks after we went in, so 3 weeks longer than the original 4 weeks we were given, and we were given a week's notice, as well as a day of preparation in school by ourselves to learn new health and safety regulations and how we would be managing our 3,000 students on campus again. So we've got quite a lot of population density here at Mount Roskill, so that was going to be quite a feat. Social distancing is almost nigh on impossible in a campus like this. But students were given allowances to create and maintain boundaries as they saw fit, and their parents were also given the option to withdraw them from school if necessary. And the Ministry of Education was really good in supporting that. They basically said that our normal attendance statistics don't really apply, and they made a lot of exceptions for students, not necessarily going straight for the truant marker, but actually just being like, okay, let's take this on a case-by-case basis. We actually had the highest attendance rates year on year for the week of term 2 that we came back into campus. So comparing attendance for the same week in the term 2 last year, we had much higher attendance than we normally would have at that kind of time of the year, which I think is an indicator of how our students really wanted to come back to school. And particularly for a school like ours, like a lot of them didn't really have great home situations during lockdown, so they really needed that safe space, and we were really glad to be able to provide it to them, even though it was quite nerve-wracking to be going back in the middle of the pandemic and we were still really unsure about our levels. Next slide. So I think it's worth noting here that New Zealand ranks 33rd out of 38 in the OECD for equitable education outcomes. And that might be a surprising statistic to some, it may be really known to a lot of you. Our child poverty rates and adult literacy rates, suicide rates, other socioeconomic indicators are actually pretty dire when you consider the lifestyle and economic outcomes many of our residents enjoy. And it's kind of the dark side of this utopian paradise that a lot of people see when they look at New Zealand. Not saying we don't have some wonderful things that I'm very grateful for, but there's also an underbelly that a lot of people don't see. It's actually for this reason I became a participant in the Teach First New Zealand program. And Teach First and Teach for All, we were quite active during lockdown, collaborating with the wider Teach for All network, sharing best practice and support resources for supporting our students in a variety of contexts. Next slide. We knew instantly that COVID would widen the divide for all of our students. Access to internet and devices is one thing, but the socioeconomic fallout of this crisis loomed large for families in our communities and for ourselves as well. And I know it can be quite overwhelming for those of us who are teaching into already low resource environments, with not only the pressure of delivering to our students in the midst of a global pandemic, but also not wanting them to be further disadvantaged down the road, whatever that road ends up looking like. The director of Teach for Pakistan said this quote in one of our meetings, for us, this is not about COVID-19. It's about the beast that we already know, educational inequality. COVID-19 simply made our raison d'etre more acute and more pressing, and it's always been our wheelhouse. I think it's worth really reflecting on the fact that we're all here and we're engaging with this discourse. That's really profound. The fact that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, we do have our own cognitive load and emotional load to be thinking about, but the fact that you're here engaging critically and collaborating to try and make your students' lives better, we're all doing this. It kind of shows that we're really showing up for them. And it's worth taking a moment to recognize the enormous cognitive load that takes as well. And the fact that you're here is something important and profound in itself. And something that it took me a while to realize. I lost a lot of sleep at the beginning of lockdown, because it was am I doing enough? How am I engaging with literature? How am I engaging with policy? How am I connecting with my students? And I just it was whirring around my brain the whole time. And it was really hard for me to step back and be like, okay, the fact that I care and I haven't just like gone into complete survival mode while still trying to survive this thing is a thing in itself. Next slide, please. So what actually happened, I guess, is what you're here to find out. And I'm going to talk about what we thought would happen and then what actually happened when we came out of lockdown, which is now almost 3 months ago, which is wild to think about. Next slide, please. During lockdown, we speculated quite a lot, both me with other staff members at my school, other staff at other schools, and Teach First cohort members. We speculated on what we expected when we returned. Primarily, we expected our student roll to decrease. Like, a lot of families lost income due to the pandemic with the economic fallout. Many of our students were actually already in employment with essential services such as supermarkets, and we were thinking that they would probably be taking extra shifts, and then it'd be really hard to hand those back. During lockdown, these students, we did have students reporting taking extra shifts and trying to support their families, and we were really concerned that at the end of the day they would just choose to continue supporting their families, which they want to do, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we were concerned that we would see a drop in our role because of that. We were also expecting delayed learning outcomes and cognitive engagement, and we were also preparing for another lockdown. I just noticed a question that I'll address really quickly. Why is New Zealand 33rd out of 38 in the OECD? We have a lot of socioeconomic disparity thanks to colonization. There are very different socioeconomic outcomes based on demographics of Māori and Pacifica peoples in New Zealand and Pākehā peoples, New Zealand Europeans. So it's quite a complex issue and probably difficult to go into, but please do, I've got details at the end of the slide for contact details, and if you'd like to talk further about that, I'd be more than happy to engage. Next slide, please. So what actually happened wasn't as overt as I expected. There are definitely some schools that experienced a drop in roll, students dropping out to care for their families, but actually I found in my own classes attendance was more or less the same, if not better than last year, but there were definitely subtle differences in the way that students presented in class, and things that it's taken me a while to learn were actually a result of lockdown. So firstly, attention spans. That was really, really clear from the start. Students were really noticeably afraid and unable to concentrate for more than like 5 to 10 minutes on a task. I actually had to completely change all of my lesson plans. I'd have some students who would be actively engaged, like emotionally engaged and talking to me, and in the middle of a sentence would just drift off. And I kind of put that down to the fact that they just hadn't had any structure really for weeks on end. Just being at school, having to go to different areas at different times, although sometimes those are things that we rail against in the education system, they do provide some kind of structure and a way for students to keep shifting gears, and it was really hard for them to do that on their own. There have definitely been, so the law and disorder bullet point, there's been a lot of incidences now of lateness, uniform infringements in classes, which may seem kind of petty things, but it's actually an indicator for me of student cohesion in general. It almost comes down to this, what I feel is existential ennui, which is like students are struggling to consolidate the reasons why they would pay attention to these small things. It's like, what's the point if the world is ending? But it does, on the whole, all of these tiny little gestures add up into this kind of messiness that it's really hard to bring them into this learning environment. You've constantly got students arriving late, corridors, our corridors are so noisy, after lessons have started, we're having to do a lot more policing of the corridors with deputy principals and things, which is surprising, and sometimes frustrating, and then you kind of realize where it's coming from. On the surface, students don't actually appear to be bothered. I hardly ever hear discussions now about COVID-19 at recess or in classes, but there are definitely some low-level tensions that weren't there last year, and possibly I think some of them are coming from us as staff. We're trying to manage our own anxiety about what's happening around the world, and then we're bringing that into our classrooms, and I think the students are very much reflecting that from us. One thing that has been really noticeable is obviously an increased racial tension between groups of different ethnicities, not just towards Asian students, but for sure, particularly abuse towards students of particularly East Asian descent. Most of our students are from immigrant families, so they have to balance their concern for their family overseas with this weird apparent normality in New Zealand. and that it kind of ends up being channeled into these racial discrepancies where normally like we're actually quite culturally cohesive. At my school and other schools, you know, it's a really beautiful thing to see. There's just been like a little bit more tension, and so like a little more incidences than they otherwise would normally be dealing with in our pastoral care system. Next slide. So I kind of realized a few weeks back in the classroom that my job is almost like an emotional gatekeeper for hysteria in my class. We know that trusting students to be agentic and self-possessed in their approach to disasters can be a really powerful tool in encouraging them to develop resilience, but we're also aware that independence can put them in distress, like too much independence. I learned really how powerful it was to reflect on my own state and how I was turning up to school and having the courage to be vulnerable with my students in a really responsible way. You know, for high school students, even as young as 12 and 13, it's actually been okay for me to front up with them and say, you know, I don't know what's going to happen, but here's how I'm going to help you deal with it or prepare for it, and we're in this together. Managing misinformation has actually been really important too. Students are hyper-connected and they love to own and share knowledge. They absolutely love it. But, you know, and so I don't really think it's fair to just shut them down. You know, they want to be sharing what they're seeing. They're scared about it too. And so it's really quick that they'll bring something into their classroom and you kind of have to address it. You can't just leave it. But I don't think it's fair to shut them down. So I try to kind of make space to have those conversations with them about how misinformation can be harmful, and giving them the time and space to think critically about where they're getting that information from and how that's serving them and how that's serving their communities and their peers, and looking after each other as well. I've adjusted my class tasks to be more or less connected to the outside world, and I take cues from my students on how much they want to apply what they're learning to what's happening out and, you know, in the world. So, you know, I find in some lessons, some students really don't have the emotional capacity to be addressing lockdown or COVID or Black Lives Matter, or everything that's going on in the world every lesson. Sometimes they do and they want to, and I give them the space to do that as well. But, you know, sometimes they just want to come in and play around with Python and have safe space to do that. And I think it's good to be able to give them that space. I become that kind of gatekeeper and allow them. I can definitely give you the resource for the list. Sorry, I've got that in my files. I'll send that along. Next slide. So I think kind of what all this comes down to is, you know, we can facilitate safe and resilient intra-disaster learning spaces for our students when we feel supported ourselves. I'm really, really lucky to have a solid support network in my school and Teach First, in my professional learning network, and in my family, which means that I can be emotionally present and generous with my students and also engage with this reflection process, not feeling like I'm going to lose my job or that I'm messing up, or, you know, obviously I have days like that too, where I feel like, oh, I didn't do that justice, or am I doing enough? But, you know, teachers can't be superheroes. I think we often forget that about ourselves. We are expecting quite a lot. And, you know, I don't think it's relevant to sort of try and create this single model of best practice for post-lockdown teaching. I'm not saying it's wrong to try, but it's just, you know, all of our contexts are so different, politically, socially, economically, all of that. But I think it's definitely possible to look into what networks can support teachers to develop their own within their own classrooms or within their own schools in a way that's really helpful and collaborative. You know, having this professional space to realize that, you know, all of us are in this brand new territory. Our industry is in this huge state of flux that it has never been in before. And, you know, finding stability in that process requires this attitude towards each other as, you know, competence of being a mindset, not necessarily just a skill set. You know, you can learn skills and help others develop theirs when you enter a space honoring that you are each experts at survival. I mean, you've made it this far, right? You've made it this far, which means that you've got something valuable. Your students do too. And so being okay with it's hard because of course there are professional requirements as well. So on that note, Belle's just gone. I'd really like to leave you with this question. What are you proud of in how you have managed this crisis, and what have you drawn strength from, and how can you take that back into your classroom, which essentially now is the great unknown? And thank you so much for listening and giving the time. Hopefully I'll be back at the end of the webinar after my year 11 computer science class coming in now. I would really love to hear your feedback and questions, challenges, compliments, any further information that you require as well. So just please email me, felicityjanepowell@gmail.com, or you can follow me at Twitter at felicityis_. And I'm really just sending all of my best wishes to all of you as you return to your classrooms. I know I can't imagine what it's like overseas, but I am sending all of the good Wairoa out to you, and all the best. And thank you very much for having me. Thanks.
Cool, thanks so much, Felicity, and yeah, all the best with next class. Typical teacher experience, right? Juggling many responsibilities and many balls at once. Without further ado, and just to make a quick and smooth transition, I'd like to hand over to our teacher Mo from Suzhou in China, sorry, I've got the order wrong. It's Kyungmin Lee from South Korea, who, like Felicity, is actually teaching at the moment. But yeah, unfortunately couldn't break away from the classroom to present. So she has kindly recorded a video for us. So Teresa, if we could switch over to that video now. And thanks once again to Felicity.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Kyungmin Lee from Samsung High School of Beauty Arts in Korea. It's really an honor to share my experiences in this webinar.
Our school name is Samsung High School of Beauty Arts. I've taught English to students since last year, so it's my second year here. Our school is a vocational school that has two major courses, cooking and beauty design. The cooking major is for chef or barista, and beauty design major is for a hair designer, nail artist, makeup artist, and skin therapist. Our school was going to open in March, but we couldn't due to COVID-19. The first person impacted with COVID-19 appeared in January 24th. Unfortunately, the situation worsened and the rate of infection increased rapidly. To prevent the situation from worsening, the Korean government decided to shut down the schools in Korea and delay the school opening until May. During the delay, all Korean teachers had to conduct online classes. In the middle of May, only the 12th grade started to come to school. And then a few weeks later, the freshmen and sophomore came to school in 1 week intervals, while the 12th grade came to school every day. So our freshmen and sophomore students have online class when they are not at school. It's all for preventing a crowded school site and avoiding contact among the students. During the COVID-19 pandemic, students and parents were so afraid, and teachers were also worried about their own health and safety. But we couldn't turn our face away from our students and give up teaching. What we could do was just prepare for every possible danger thoroughly. There are two main methods for the health and safety in school side. First, our school made the manual for the preparation of COVID-19. Every teacher was educated on what to do when we have someone suspected of having COVID-19. There are some methods for this, and I would like to introduce the 4 specific methods we are conducting. In specific, teachers check not only their own body temperature, but also all students' body temperature every morning and every lunchtime. And everyone sanitizes their hands with the sanitizer that the school gave to students. Even the Ministry of Education distributed an internet link for self-symptom check. And the ministry made the students do that every morning before leaving their home in the morning. The link judges whether students can go to school based on the results of checklist. That means we are trying to check a student's health condition several times every day. Next, every teacher brings a first aid kit and walkie-talkie to all classes. The first aid kit is for an emergency situation, and the walkie-talkie is to deliver information when we have a suspect of COVID-19. If suspected someone is infected, teachers can use the walkie-talkie to get information about what they have to do, and they can handle the emergency as soon as possible. Third, we changed the arrangement of students' desk and cafeteria seat. We used to place the students' desk in a pair set as the first square on the screen. However, we rearranged them separately. Furthermore, we also changed the seats in the cafeteria. Students sat opposite sides to each other before school opening, but now they are seated in one way with nobody to their opposite side. All of these seating arrangements are to minimize their contact and for social distancing. The second main measure is changing the teaching method. It was default for every teacher and student to wear masks. We avoided any type of group activities. We also tried to minimize the interaction between students, which could be the way to minimize infection even while we are teaching. When I considered the challenges at first for this webinar, it was hard to divide the challenges between students or teachers, because most of the challenges belong to both teachers and students. And I thought some countries still have to conduct online class instead of offline class. Therefore, I divided them online and offline. The first challenge for online class was that teachers cannot control the students' attendance and participation. Most parents of students go to work in the daytime, and students usually stay home alone. That means we cannot manage those who sleep or who don't want to listen to the class. The environment in which teachers cannot teach them in person without any activities leads to students' low learning motivation. I tried many things to solve this problem, and in my case, the most effective method was making the class like a radio show. I usually use a live streaming program for my online classes. I would teach the content and randomly call students, acting like a DJ, and ask them questions about today's lesson, like a quiz show. For example, can you tell me the answer of number 1? Or, what do you think about it? Like this. Fortunately, students' reaction was good. They felt excited about the random selection and listening to what their friends were saying through the live streaming. The second challenge was about the supply of devices or internet infra. Even though Korea has really fast internet speed and infra, the Korean government prohibited Wi-Fi in schools for the security problem. And most teachers didn't have enough equipment for live streaming that they didn't need before. Furthermore, some students who are low income did not have enough internet data for a whole day of online classes. To solve this problem, the government permitted Wi-Fi in school and paid the internet fee for low-income students. Additionally, our school bought or borrowed many equipment for high-quality mics and cameras for teachers. Actually, in addition to these two issues, there were many more challenges, such as teachers didn't know how to use the online class program and devices, and it took so long to make teaching materials for online classes. These problems could be solved by educating teachers on the different programs and technology to conduct online classes. The next challenge is about offline class. The biggest challenge for offline class was the lack of teaching continuity. As I mentioned before, Korean schools are open every 2 weeks for freshmen and sophomore. This system could guarantee students and teachers' safety, but it also brought some confusion. Teachers should prepare 2 types of classes, an online and offline class, every other week. And it is a very big burden for teachers who have a lot of work to do. For students, their learning concentration cannot last continuously since their concentration is much higher in offline class than online class. Thus, to improve their concentration while they are online, some teachers gave them assignments that they have to do by themselves. And teachers also prepared an offline class that students cannot participate in if they didn't do their homework properly in online class.
Okay, it was awesome. It was a really, beautifully structured and informative presentation. And I saw in the chat box a few of you really enjoyed the idea of teaching a class like a radio show and randomly calling students. Not sure how well my former students would respond to random calls from the teacher, but maybe that's something we can discuss in the discussion time, how well that strategy would work in your schools. It's now my pleasure to introduce next Zhenjiang Mao from Suzhou in China, who will be presenting similarly on her experience returning to school. So Mo, welcome, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Hi, morning everyone. Morning from China, okay? Now first, let me introduce my city and my school a little bit. And from the first slide, we can see the map. It's about China and South Korea. Actually, my city is located in the east, yes, very close to Shanghai. I think I put a star in the PPT, but now I can't find, but never mind. Now, my city is very close to Shanghai. It's only about half an hour by bullet train. And my school is a long history school. It's a long history middle school in the center of Suzhou. It is very famous. And we have 3 grades in our school, grade 7, 8, and 9. And each grade, there are 20 classes and 50 students in each class. So maybe you can imagine it's a bigger class, bigger school. And I teach in grade 8. I teach English in China. I used to teach Chinese in North Carolina, High Point, an elementary school. Yeah, it's a bigger school and a bigger class. Yeah. And I'm happy here to share some information about go back to school. Every now we are experiencing a very special, very hard time now because of COVID-19. But never mind, I will show you. But I will show you a video. The video is about the things we did to protect ourselves during the school time. And also we send the video to each family before school. So the family, the parents, they will watch the TV, the video at home, and to teach their kids again and again to let them know what they need to pay attention to when they are in the school. Now, next slide, please. Now here is a video we are enjoying, and I know there will be some questions for you to ask me. Never mind, I will stay in the webinar so you can ask me. Please show it. Thank you. Okay, thank you for showing the video. And I saw some questions for me. Yes, we did the temperature 3 times a day when they enter the school during the lunchtime and when they leave the school. We are temperature everybody 3 times a day, also our teachers. And from the video, we'll see the things that our school did. But you know, in our city, we also do something more. Just like everyone, we have a mobile phone and we have the app. So everybody will have your own QR code, just like the little screen. It will track the ways you have been. So if you go to some high-risk areas, the code will turn to red. Then you will go to some place that some people will not allow you let in. And if you keep stay in safe areas, the code will keep green. So this is also very important. So in China nowadays, you have to show your code every places you want to go. So they will let you in or not allow you in by the code color. And also, before going back to school, our teachers did a lot of online class, just like the teacher from Korea. Yes, we did a lot. And also our teachers, we have a lot of meetings and trainings before class. Can you show us the pictures from the PPT one by one?
No, that didn't work for some reason.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. From the PowerPoint, maybe we can see our teachers have classes online and the students have classes at their home. Also, we also can see some posters look like the doctors. So during the winter vacation, we shut down our school, but we shut down school, but we didn't stop our teaching. So every teachers, we tried our best to teach online. And we also encourage students to get some information about the COVID-19, and we encourage them to do the poster. So by finishing the poster, every student know clearly about the COVID. They know how dangerous it is. And when they back to school, they know we have to wear mask. We need to do everything the teacher told us to do. We know it's very hard to keep our mask all day long, but our kids are great. They can keep now. And also, I think the important things for our teachers and the students are the mental health, just like some teacher discuss in the discuss area. I saw that, you know, because of we did a lot of things, encourage students to know about the COVID, so they already know about the COVID. And very luckily, when kids back to school, we first thing we think we are very lucky. Yes, we are safe. We can see our teachers face by face, and we also can see our friends, classmates. So I think it's a very good time for me to teach back in classroom, and our kids show the best time they have never shown me before. They are so focused on my class, and they do homework so carefully, and the parents showed so great to me. Yeah, they are more kinder than before. They trying to understand everything our school and the teacher did for everyone. So actually, I want to say, yes, we are experiencing very hard time, but at the meantime, we showed that we are in the same boat. We are in the same boat, and and I think our government are trustable. Yeah, they offered all the things we need, just like some teacher said, is a wiper offered by school. Yes, I every day, yes, our school offered all the things we need, just like the wipes, mask for our teachers and the students. Okay. I know from the video, maybe we'll have some more questions. So I will ask you later. I will keep stay in the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mo. And sorry, I was a little bit distracted there because I was engaged in the chat boxes. So many great questions are coming up, and it was amazing to see that video and just the level of compliance from schools and teachers, but also as we're watching from perhaps the USA or New Zealand or elsewhere, also seeing how resource and time intensive those strategies are. But nevertheless, there are some amazing lessons in there for us to learn from. And yeah, we really appreciate your contribution. Next up, we've got Nurit Ben David Erez from Israel. And we'll be also looking at school reopening there. And I'm looking forward to learning more about this because I understand the situation in Israel has been quite different to New Zealand and China. So Nurit.
Hi everyone, my name is Nurit and as you can see I'm from Israel and I will speak about going back to school and back to school and back to school in COVID-19 era. First, I would like to thank everyone who took part in this initiative because I think it's a great idea. It's great that we teachers can share our experiences and best practices. And a special thanks to Elisheva who connected me to this initiative and contacted me. So I will tell you a bit about myself, about what's happening here in Israel, and my special school. So we are in the second wave of COVID-19, and after the quarantine, the first one, we reopened, and my school is now closed for the third time. I'm not scared. I'm not saying it to scare you. I'm saying it because it can happen, and it is something we have to live with. The first time that we closed was because one of our students was in touch with someone else who tested positive. He tested negative, and a few days later, we reopened. The second time was not even something that is connected to the school. The district we're located in had too many positive cases, so the government closed it for a certain period of time and then reopened. And now the third time, which is the important one to emphasize, is that one of our staff members tested positive after her daughter, came back sick home, and we did not catch it. We are all negative. Hopefully we will stay that way, and I will get back to it later on. I was asked to address a few questions, and I will address them one by one. What are the health and safety measures that have been put in place in the classroom? So we teach in what we call capsules, and I think that in the States you call it pods. So the students are in their homeroom classroom. They do not go to other rooms, classrooms, and they stay with the same students and teachers all day. I am an EFL teacher, as I said before, so I'm allowed to go in, but only unless it will change, because as we all know, our ministry, in Israel and in other countries, sometimes change the guidelines too often. But in principle, I'm allowed to go only to 4 spaces, homeroom classrooms. So if I need to teach more, I teach by Zoom. Their homeroom teacher opens Zoom and we address the class and also the students that stay at home, because some students stay at home whether because they are sick or their parents are too afraid to send them. So we combine the two. Of course, we need masks. And I do think that it's important to emphasize that it's very difficult to be with a mask all day. So for those of you who have some issues with your vocal cords, or just think that it would be difficult to speak to a whole space, a classroom, with your mask on the whole day, just take a Madonna. I think it can help. Wipes, of course, we wipe everything a few times a day, and the students do it too. And I think it's important to teach them. It's some skills, it's life skills. Hand sanitizers, of course, personal supplies. We do not exchange personal supplies, so they have to bring their own from home. Yes, sometimes there are students who don't have the means to have all the supplies, so we give it to them, but it stays in their pencil cases and they do not exchange it with other students. And of course, keeping our distance from one another. As you can see in these pictures, the gloves. I personally do not recommend gloves because I think that it gives us a false sense of security, of safety. You don't have to agree with me, that's what I think, so I think it's better to use hand sanitizers and rinse our hands a few times a day and not wear gloves. Masks, of course, there are several kinds of masks, and whatever suits you. Some teachers find the masks that are from Perspex, like it's I don't know, it's I can show you a picture. Where is it? Here. You know that these kinds that are transparent, some teachers find them easier to be with, so choose your own. And very important is the elbow greetings. The students need a lot of warmth. They need to feel that we are there for them, that we sympathize with their feelings and their bewilderment because they're confused. So we teach them new ways to show them that we care, that they care for one another, either with the elbows or kissing in a distance. As for keeping their distance from one another, yes, it's a bit funny because we can say whatever we want. It's very difficult, especially for kids, and more so for kids who are not very smart and they don't understand everything. So we have to be police officers and remind them all day that it's for them, it's for their own safety, and we don't want them to be sick. And explain it with everything we got again and again, and I'll get back to it later on. What is it like to teach in that environment? Difficult. How have students responded? They were happy to be back. They wanted to be with their friends. Some of them were very lonely. Some of them don't even have computers at home, so they couldn't even learn through Zoom. So either we talked to them on the phone or send some videos or connected through WhatsApp, but it's still not the same. So they were very happy. However, they were very confused at the same time because they had to get used to new rules, new ways of connecting and even new ways of learning, because we couldn't sit with them, next to them, and explain whatever they needed us to explain. So what are one or two main challenges that they were facing, and the strategies we used to overcome those challenges? As I said before, they were confused. They need a lot of bridging. So what we do is sometimes we go back to the front of the classroom and we speak to them without our masks, but from a distance. And those who have Madonna can use the Madonna. We use technologies because we cannot use games that they can exchange things between themselves. So it's very difficult. So we use technologies instead. And as for emotional support, we try to talk to them a lot. We try to explain a lot. We try to set an example, to tell them that we do understand it's difficult for us, but we're there for each other as friends and as teachers. And we also try to explain with giving examples like experiments. I'll show you what I mean. I mean, for example, there are experiments that we can show them in on YouTube. We can also do that if we give each kid some things that they can experiment on their own without the others. And for example, if we give them a plate with soap and pepper, they can understand, they can do it by themselves and understand a little bit what are germs and with the pepper and how soap help. You can find on YouTube some other experiments and ways to show your students whatever suits their level and whatever you think is more interesting for them. And the challenges that we're facing as we return is when they go back home after each time we close, they go back to their old routines. We go to them too, so we have our old routines too. We need to stick to very strict routines, strict rules that we set, and not change them every time we go back. It confuses everyone. So, and we have to be very aware that we don't go back. For example, that staff member that was not with her mask and went too close to other staff members. It's difficult to be aware of it all the time, but we need to. We have to incorporate new ways of teaching and learning in order for us to keep our distance. So if your students don't understand something and you cannot come close, do it through WhatsApp if you can. Most of our kids have cell phones. I know not everyone does. So if you have a barcode or, you know what, even a poster, you can show it on posters. Yes, it's difficult, but we have to find new ways to show them. You can give them some personal board if you can't buy one, you can laminate some some A4 paper, and that would be their personal board. They can write on it and erase each time. And if you have iPads, I really recommend it. I sometimes also use apps on smartphones if they do have it. So to summarize everything is being there for them, incorporating new rules, new ways that will keep us safe and keep our distance. And if you have any question, please write them down on the chat. Goodbye and good luck. Be well, be safe.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nurit. And I do know you're on the call as well. And so it's been amazing to have the video presented to us and just such clear detail and analysis of what's working and what has been a struggle, but also your attention to the chat box and answering questions has just really added some depth and some quality to your presentation. So it really is appreciated. And we're very fortunate in that we are doing well on time. Our presentations from China and Korea were very efficient, and so we've got a bit of extra time up our sleeve and can therefore also include Naomi Rotish's presentation from Kenya. Now, Naomi is a teacher who is also part of the Concordia University and World Vision Early Grade Literacy and Numeracy project, which is really focused in on digital learning in the classroom and in the context of Kenya. And the reason we've included this presentation is it provides quite a different context and a different scenario compared to New Zealand, China, Korea, and Israel. So Teresa, if we can press play on Naomi's presentation.
Okay, good morning everyone. It's morning in Kenya. That is why I'm asking good morning. This is teacher Naomi Rotich, a very passionate teacher, and she likes dealing or concerned so much in early literacy. Thank you so much for the invitation to this webinar discussion, and I'm privileged. I know you're very eager to hear how my presentation goes, and this is my presentation. Welcome. One is to do with COVID-19. COVID-19 is a disease which has given me a discomfort, and I know nobody is feeling comfortable with the disease. The COVID-19 landed in our country, Kenya, the month of March, and it led to the decision, or the government decided to close all the learning institutions. And it's a brilliant idea because lives are more important than education, to be precise. So, but this prolonged closure has given me a discomfort at the same time because of the effects of this COVID-19 on education matters. Students or girls, teenagers, girls were experiencing early pregnancies and early marriages at the moment. We are also experiencing child labor because of the idleness at home. So these effects is not giving me any comfort, because I'm worried when we reopen in January. As we look forward to the reopening in January, I wonder how many students, there will be a very great number of students who may not turn, or the turn-up will be low as compared to the teenagers or those middle-grade learners. I'm also worried as a teacher whether our colleagues will all report or will all turn up because of the age factor and the immune system or the health issues. Remember, the age bracket, maybe from 50 and above, we are worried. My colleagues may be informed or may be asked to go for early retirement, which is our worry as teachers. We are also worried because of the colleagues who have these other conditions like the diabetes, like those living with HIV and AIDS. So those are the worries that the teachers we have. We may end up losing or ending up retiring early. Let me talk number two, supporting this learning despite all these crises. Despite the crisis, how are we supporting learning? One, the government adopted learning or remote learning in online through the radios, televisions, and through the internet. This learning was conducted or is conducted using the devices. As far as internet is concerned, a family should have a computer or a device or a phone to use for that child or that student in that household to access learning. A family should have a radio, a family should have a television. So this learning disadvantageously, or it is a disadvantage to the marginal and vulnerable children, in that they are not able to access this learning. There is that gap. There is that gap in equity of access. So it has been widened so much. So in supporting this learning, remember I am in a remote areas. So in supporting this learning in remote areas together with my colleagues, we are moving from one household to another. We are also observing the social distance. We are observing the hand washing. We are observing also the sanitizing. So we are very grateful because of an initiative from Concordia University in partnership with World Vision, which has really assisted us as passionate teachers to support learning in remote areas. We are very grateful, and the initiative is for the early years. And I'm also happy because I am passionate in early literacy. So we are dealing with grade 1 and grade 2 and 3. The initiative is good. The initiative is bringing back that prolonged loss of learning for the students. We realize when these students have really lost so much, so that when we started this moving or working to the household supporting learning, we realized the grade 1s have really forgotten everything. So we were starting from square one, or we are starting from zero, or PP2 level. They are not, the grade 1 level was not started anyway. So the initiative is helping us to bring these students, to bring these learners to the normal level. We are very grateful. We are also thankful because of the support from the World Vision and Concordia through the masks, through the sanitizers, and through the material we are using. The challenge here is that we are not, we are supposed, because it's home-based learning, we are expected parents to support us. Maybe we expect also the older sibling to support us in one way or another, because we are not moving this household every now and then. So that time we are not coming this household, maybe going to another household, because we are supporting maybe 10 households within reach. Not actually, we are not moving the whole county or the whole country. We are moving those immediate households we are able to reach. So that time we are not visiting, maybe we alternate. That day we are not coming, we are coming to another household. We expect that parent to assist us in learning. But you find parents are not able to read and write, not all. So that's a challenge. So because that day you did not come, when you will visit another day, you're supposed to repeat what you are, maybe you could have been assisted. That's another challenge. So a challenge again is the concentration. Remember, this is home-based learning, and we're doing it in home environment. So home environment is different from school environment. There are activities taking place in this household. There are very many activities which is taking the concentration of these early years learners other than in class. Maybe chapati is being cooked there in the kitchen. Maybe chapati is being cooked there. So the student may concentrate so much in the smell than what you're teaching or what they are learning. Another activity may be taking care of the animals. Maybe that student is concentrating so much on the sheep or cows, so concentration is disturbed, or learning process is disturbed. Another thing is that these households, a challenge again, is that these households are far much apart. So we work even to a distance of 1 kilometer. So that's our challenge. But because of that passion and because of that heart to assist that learner, it is giving us that hope, and it is giving us that strength to move. Thank you so much. Because of the Concordia University, again, they are assisting us in getting something small for transport and for lunch. Remember, energy also is needed here because of working and moving and teaching and over learning. So as we also look forward to the reopening in China, we ask the government, we urge the government to build enough infrastructures. Remember, we will reopen and social distancing will be very paramount. So the infrastructures in the school are not enough. So expect the ministry and the government to construct enough for social distance. For these groups of learners, they will no longer sit in a large group of learners in a class. They will be grouped in small number because of that, because of the COVID-19. Another thing is that we expect the government to provide us with the sanitizers, the hand washing facilities enough for all students. So also there will be enough face masks for all students and teachers. We expect also the government to provide capacity building or information to the learners, to the teachers, and to the parents, because to safeguard a community. So to safeguard all these people, they need to have the information from the health or the Ministry of Health. That is what we are expecting the government. As educators or as teachers, we are also prepared for hard task ahead of us. Remember, the curriculum will be done uniform. Nobody is transisting. And we are ready for the hard task ahead and very many group of learners. Maybe the government, we urge also the government to hire more educators so that to assist in these very many groups. Other than, so failure to do that, we are expected to be ready for the hard times ahead. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Naomi. And there's so much I want to comment on here and so much I want to reflect on, but I'm sure all of you have got a number of thoughts and questions and issues you're wanting to share with colleagues. So we'll move into the discussion very briefly. Teresa, can I ask you very, very briefly just to stop the screen share so we can see everyone in the gallery view? And as we break into the gallery view, look at that. You can bring your images up or bring your video up. Just to do a round of applause for all the teachers that have presented so generously today. So some of you, if you don't have your videos up, on the bottom right of your toolbar, you'll see the reactions. You can do a little digital clap too. So I will do one on mine just to join the club. But as I'm sure all of you will agree, one of the greatest sources of strength and inspiration we can get at this time is from colleagues. And so for that reason, I'm just so, so grateful to everyone that has presented.